Montana Territory, 1879. The storm broke hard and fast over the grasslands just west of Fort Benton. One moment the sky was only dimming with dusk, and the next it was tearing open with thunder like cannon fire. Naomi Judson yanked the reins of her mare, trying to calm the animal as the wind picked up. Her fingers were already aching from the cold rain, her skirts soaked through, and her bonnet pulled clean off by the last gust. She was a mile from the wagon road, alone, and the sky had turned the same color as her grief. The horse panicked. A crack of lightning lit up the plains, and the mare screamed, jerking hard to the left. Naomi held on, her heart slamming in her ribs, but the saddle slipped, and then she was falling mud, grass, and sky spinning until the ground knocked the breath clean out of her. When she sat up, the horse was gone. She tried to stand, but pain flared in her ankle. She bit her lip and looked around. There was no shelter but a narrow cluster of cottonwoods a few hundred yards off. Thunder snarled again. She limped toward the trees, cradling her arm, soaked and shivering. By the time she made it under the branches, the rain had become a downpour. Naomi curled against the roots of the largest tree, hugging herself, the ache in her ankle pulsing hot. The wind tore through the leaves like screaming voices. She had not meant to ride alone. She had not even meant to be in Montana this long. But nothing had gone as planned, not since her father died last spring, not since the family store burned down, and certainly not since her cousin sold her mule team for whiskey and vanished. Naomi wiped rain from her face and pressed her forehead to her knees. Far off, hooves pounded. She lifted her head sharply. A figure came into view through the sheets of rain, tall in the saddle, moving fast. The rider slowed as he caught sight of her, dismounted before the horse had fully stopped, and jogged toward her, his coat flapping behind him. "You hurt?" His voice was deep, urgent. He knelt beside her, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. "On my ankle," she said. The horse bolted. I saw her tearing south. Damned storm. "Can you move?" "Not well." He hesitated only half a second, then shrugged out of his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. His hands were warm, rough. "We'll wait the worst of it here." She nodded, teeth chattering. "I'm Owen Ward," he added. "I work cattle north of here." "You got a name?" "Naomi Judson." He crouched beside her under the tree, close enough she could feel the heat of him. His horse stood tied nearby, head down against the rain. "I was riding out to check the river," he said, voice quieter now. "Thought I saw a horse running wild. Lucky I did." Naomi glanced at him. His jaw was squared, beard trimmed short, brown hair rain darkened and curling at the edges. There was a steadiness in his eyes that made her chest ache a little less. "I was trying to get to my uncle's place," she said. "He's older. Lives out near Mission Creek." He gave a small nod. "You're a long way off." "I know." Thunder crashed again, and she flinched. Owen shifted instinctively closer, pressing his shoulder against hers. "You're safe now," he said. "I've got you." The words were simple, but they sank deep. Maybe it was the storm. Maybe it was the quiet way he said them, as if he meant them with every part of him. They waited under the tree as the storm raged around them. Twice he adjusted his coat to keep her dry. Once, when she shivered too hard to speak, he wrapped an arm gently around her shoulders and held her against him. She did not stop him. She leaned into the warmth of his body, her cheek against his chest, and let the weight of the rain fade behind the sound of his heartbeat. When the storm eased, the light was nearly gone. "Let me get you out of here," he said. "You can ride with me. I'll take you to my place tonight, then get you to Mission Creek come morning." She hesitated. He looked at her, steady and kind. "You have my word, Naomi?" She nodded. He helped her up, careful not to jostle her ankle, then lifted her into the saddle before swinging up behind her. His arms came around her, firm and assured, guiding the reins. She felt the rise and fall of his chest at her back, the solid comfort of him. They rode through the wet grass, the last gray light fading behind them. "Thank you," she said quietly. Any man would have done the same. No, they wouldn't. He was silent for a moment. Then, maybe not. But I'm glad I found you. Her fingers curled around the edge of his coat, holding tight. So was she. The cabin sat low against a rise of pines, its roof shingled with bark and moss. Smoke curled from the chimney, faint in the damp night air. Owen dismounted first, then lifted Naomi down, his hands firm beneath her arms, careful not to make her wince. She leaned on him as they crossed the slick yard, her gait uneven with the weight off her ankle. Inside, the fire was already burning. The warmth met her like a living thing, and her eyes stung before she could stop it. He helped her to a wooden chair near the hearth, then knelt to unlace her boot. She hissed softly as he eased it off. "Swelling's not too bad," he said, brushing wet hair from his brow. "You'll walk again soon enough, but not tonight." She nodded, watching as he filled a tin basin with water from a kettle and brought it to her feet. His hands were work-worn, knuckles raw from rope and weather. He soaked a cloth and pressed it to her ankle with a tenderness that surprised her. "You live here alone?" "For the last 3 winters," he said, setting the cloth aside. "There's a line shack for cowhands, but I keep this place to myself." He stood, moving to hang her wet cloak and saddlebag by the door. The cabin was narrow, but tidy, a cot tucked in one corner, shelves lined with jars and folded linens, a rifle leaning against the far wall. The smell of juniper smoke lingered in the beams. She shifted in the chair, unsure where to place her hands. "I'm not used to men doing for me." He glanced back, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't have to be used to being left out in a storm either." She looked down at her lap. Rain had darkened the hem of her skirt to a deep slate. "I worked in a general store before everything turned. Folks came in needing all manner of things: flour, coffee, a little dignity. I learned how to read what they weren't saying." He poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed her one. "What am I not saying?" "That you've been alone longer than you meant to be," she said quietly. "And you're not sure what to do with someone who doesn't need saving. Just help." He leaned against the table, his cup resting on his palm. "You see all that from the way I carry a basin? I see it in the way you don't ask questions you're curious to know." He took a sip and watched the fire for a long minute. "I had a younger brother. Named Caleb. He drowned riding spring runoff down near the Judith River. That was 6 seasons back. After that I stayed put. Stopped chasing cattle down into the breaks. Took to fixing fence and keeping to myself." She didn't speak. The silence stretched, companionable this time. "I didn't mean to be alone this long either," she said finally. "My mother passed when I was 17. My father, not long ago. I thought I'd be starting something new by now. Turns out I've mostly been starting over." His voice softened. "You got anyone waiting for you near Mission Creek?" "My uncle's all I've got left. He's not well. I came to help him through the winter if he'd have me." Owen nodded, then crossed to the cupboard and brought out a loaf of bread and a crock of beans. He ladled food into 2 bowls, set one before her, and sat across the table. They ate quietly, the fire crackling between them. Naomi studied his face in the shifting light line from sun and wind, not yet hardened. There was a tiredness around the eyes, but no bitterness. Just the kind of stillness that comes from learning to live with sorrow. When the meal was finished, he rinsed the dishes and returned to the fire. "You take the cot tonight. I'll sleep near the door. I don't want to put you out of your own bed." "You didn't," he said. "You just landed here. That's different." She smiled then, the first since the storm. "Thank you, Owen." He nodded once, then pulled a blanket from the shelf and spread it by the hearth. She lay down on the cot, watching the glow of the coals dance across the rafters. The wind had quieted. Her ankle throbbed, but less than before. She listened to the sound of his breathing, slow and even just across the room. "Good night," she said into the dark. "Sleep easy, Naomi." She closed her eyes, feeling steadier than she had in weeks. Not safe, exactly. but seen. And for now, that was enough. Morning came slow and blue-edged, seeping through the chinks in the cabin walls. Naomi woke to the scent of simmering oats, and the sound of wood shifting in the stove. Her limbs were stiff, her ankles still swollen, but the ache had dulled to something manageable. She sat up, adjusting the wool blanket and brushing sleep from her eyes. Owen stood near the hearth, sleeves rolled, pouring water into a tin basin. His hair was still damp from stepping out, and his shirt clung to his shoulders in places, dark from melted frost. "You didn't stir once," he said without looking over. "Thought maybe you'd sleep straight through to noon. I haven't rested like that in weeks," she said, voice rough from sleep. "Maybe months." He turned then, setting the basin on the table. "There's coffee steeped, and I hope you like oats. They're what I've got." She eased herself to the edge of the cot. "I'm grateful for whatever's warm." He brought her a mug and bowl, then sat across from her, cradling his own cup between both hands. "Track's still too wet to move fast. Even with a calm horse, I wouldn't risk it till afternoon." Her eyes flicked to the window. Mist clung low to the ground, and the pines looked half drowned in it. She nodded. "I'm not in a hurry anymore." He studied her for a moment. "You said your uncle wasn't in good health. You sure he's got what he needs out there?" She waited before answering. "He gets by with help from a neighbor family. I was meant to relieve them, but I suppose they'll wait one more day." Owen leaned back, stretching his legs. "I've met the McClendons. They're good folks. They'd wait out a week if they had to." So he knew the land well enough to name neighbors. She stored that away. She looked at the shelf behind him, where a line of pencil stubs sat beside a folded square of paper. "You write?" "Sometimes," he said. "Keeps the quiet from closing in too tight." "What do you write about?" He hesitated, then gave a small shrug. "Cattle prices. Weather. Dreams I can't quite forget." She tucked one foot beneath her skirt, careful not to jostle the injured ankle. "Do you ever send letters? Or are they just for you?" "They're just mine. Haven't had anyone to send to. Not for a long time." She stirred her oats, letting the silence settle again. Then, softly, "There was a man back in Kansas. Thought I'd marry him, once the dust settled after my father passed. But he wanted something quieter than I could give him. I didn't blame him." He didn't press for more. Just nodded, watching the steam curl from his mug. After the meal, she helped clear the dishes, leaning against the table for balance. Owen didn't offer to stop her. He watched, but didn't hover. She appreciated that more than she could say. By midday, the clouds had lifted and the light turned gold at the edges. Owen stepped outside to saddle his horse, and she followed, limping carefully across the packed earth. He turned when he heard her. "You should be off that foot." She rested her hand on the gatepost. "I've ridden through worse." He met her gaze, quiet and steady. "I know you have." He brought the horse close and laced his hands to lift her. She settled into the saddle, and he mounted behind her. They didn't speak much as they rode. The trail toward Mission Creek wound along a narrow ridge, the land still slick beneath the hooves. Naomi leaned forward slightly, the reins resting against her palms, and felt Owen's breath warm against her neck. He adjusted their pace with care, guiding the horse with a quiet confidence that steadied her. "Did you always know this country?" she asked after a time. "I came north when I was 20. Took work on a drive out of Wyoming. My brother followed after, but he never stayed long in one place. I guess I did." "Why?" His fingers tightened slightly on the reins. "Because it felt honest. Land like this, it doesn't pretend to be easy. But it gives back what you put in." They rode the rest of the way in silence, the wind brushing low across the grass. By the time her uncle's cabin came into view, the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the split-rail fence. Smoke curled from the chimney, thin and pale. A dog barked once in the distance. Owen stopped short of the gate. "You want me to see you inside?" She turned in the saddle, searching his face. Will you wait? His mouth lifted just slightly at the corner. I've got nowhere else I'd rather be. She nodded, heart steadier than it had been in a long time. Then I'll only be a moment. She climbed down with care, limped to the door, and knocked. A voice called from within. She disappeared inside, and he waited, the reins loose in one hand. When she returned, she carried a small satchel and a folded note. He'll be all right, she said, offering the letter. McClendons are staying with him another week. He took the paper but didn't open it. I told him I'd be back before the next frost. Owen helped her back into the saddle without a word. But when he climbed up behind her again, his arm came around her waist with a quiet certainty. They turned the horse toward the ridgeline, and rode side by side into the falling light. By the time they reached Owen's cabin again, the sky had turned the color of wheat ash, soft and streaked with lavender. Naomi sat straighter in the saddle, though her ankles still tugged with each shift of weight. She dismounted without asking for help, and Owen let her, stepping back without a word. Inside, the fire had burned low to embers. Naomi moved to the hearth, piling on wood from the stack near the door. Her hands moved with quiet purpose. Owen stripped off his coat and hung it beside hers. You're staying, then? She didn't turn from the fire. I told my uncle I'd return in a week. But I didn't say where I was spending those days. She settled onto the chair by the table, her back to the warmth. Owen stood a moment longer, then reached for the kettle. You ever think about leaving Montana? She asked. Not for good. Just to see something different. He poured water into a tin cup, hands steady. Used to. Thought about California once. Then the cattle herds came in strong and made staying seem sensible. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees. I saw the ocean once. Before I turned 20. It surprised me how loud it was. He handed her the cup, his fingers brushing hers. What else did you see? Women walking alone without being stared at. Men selling oranges on the corner. Nobody knew who I was. I liked it for about 3 days. Then I missed being known. Owen sat across from her, arms resting on the table. You ever wish you'd stayed? She shook her head. Places like that don't ask anything of you. Not even your name. I need more than that. He looked at her, not speaking for a long moment. Then he reached under the table and drew out a shallow, worn cedar box. Inside were a few folded scraps of paper, a curved bone-handled knife, and what looked like a broken boot heel. Naomi raised an eyebrow. He set the box on the table and lifted the heel. Caleb carved his name into this when he was 12. Said it would keep his boots lucky. Found it near the river after he passed. Never could throw it away. She touched the edge of the wood, fingers gentle. You still talk to him? Sometimes. Mostly when I can't sleep. He paused. You talk to your father? Only when I'm scared. Or angry. I don't tell him things he can't fix. They sat there, quiet, stretching between them. The wind outside shifted, brushing the corners of the cabin like an old hand at the door. You ever think about building something more permanent out here? She asked. A barn. A second room. A life. He met her eyes. I think about it more now than I ever did. She didn't look away. I don't have much to offer. Just a pair of hands that know how to work, and a stubborn bent toward making things last. Owen stood slowly, walked to the stove, and poured what was left of the coffee into his cup. That's more than most come with. She rose too, testing her ankle. I'm not asking for anything. I just don't want to keep riding away from every place that feels like it might hold. He crossed the room and stopped in front of her. I'm not the sort to promise what I can't give. But I've got land that needs tending. I've got fence slats that need mending come spring. I've got nights like this, and mornings that follow. She studied his face, the lines that didn't come from smiling but from watching the horizon for signs of change. I've got a quilt I stitched last winter, tucked in my satchel. I could mend that fence with you, come thaw. He reached out, resting his hand lightly against her cheek. You stay, Naomi Judson, and I'll make you room in every part of this life I've got. She leaned into his hand, not needing more than that. She didn't ask for promises, didn't offer them either. But she took his words the way she'd taken his coat beneath the storm, warm, needed, and exactly enough. That night, she didn't sleep on the cot. They shared the single bed, either speaking as the fire went out. His hand found hers in the dark, and she held it, steady and sure. Outside, the world was still damp from the storm. But inside, the quiet held. And for the first time in a long while, so did she. 2 days later, the thaw began. Not the full spring melt, but something smaller, quieter. The ground softened just enough to give beneath a boot heel, and the creek behind Owen's cabin, long locked under frost, murmured faintly beneath its crust of ice. Naomi stood outside that morning, a borrowed shawl looped around her shoulders, watching a jay flit between the bare branches of a pine. Her ankles still ached if she stepped wrong, but she moved easier now, the stiffness easing with each day of rest. Behind her, the cabin door stood open, warm air drifting out in slow curls. Owen stepped up beside her, sleeves rolled, a strip of rawhide hanging from one hand. "I've got a line snapped on the east fence," he said. "Was going to walk it after breakfast." She nodded, eyes still on the bird. "You want help?" He looked at her sidelong. "Thought you'd ask." They set off together, the pace measured. She carried a small hammer and pouch of nails. He had wire coiled over one shoulder and a post-hole digger slung across his back. The trail curved east, down toward a shallow basin where the cattle grazed in warmer months. Now it lay bare, tufts of old grass poking through snow patches. "You always fix things yourself?" Naomi asked, adjusting the strap of her satchel. "Usually." He glanced at her. "But I'd rather not, if I had the choice." She smiled to herself. "Well, you've got one now." They found the break near a wind-scoured cottonwood, the post split at the base where snow runoff had eaten away at the root. Owen wedged it upright while Naomi braced it with a stone and held it steady. Her hands, though still healing from the chill of that storm, moved with practiced ease. She didn't speak much, and he didn't fill the silence either. They worked until the wire ran taut and the post held firm again. As they stood back, Owen wiped his brow with the back of his arm. "You've done that before." She gave a soft laugh. "I was raised by a man who thought every daughter should know how to set a fence and shoot a squirrel by age 12. Owen's gaze lingered on her a moment longer than necessary. "That man raised someone worth knowing." They made it back by midday. Naomi set stew to warm while Owen hauled in kindling. As she stirred the pot, she glanced toward the door. "You ever think of keeping a milk cow?" she asked. "There's pasture enough. And the cabin's got shade come summer." He wiped his hands on a towel, looking thoughtful. "I've thought about a lot of things lately I hadn't before." Naomi turned, ladle still in hand. "Say them out loud." He stepped closer, his voice low and even. "I think about clearing the back of the cabin and putting in a second room. I think about planting beans and squash along the south fence. I think about what it might be like to have someone here who doesn't leave when the weather turns." She let the silence stretch between them before speaking. "Would you want to marry again?" His jaw shifted, but not with discomfort. "I never did the first time. Came close once, but it didn't hold. I'd do it now if it meant something steady. Something good." Naomi set the ladle aside. "Then maybe we should talk about what comes next." Owen reached for her hand, his fingers rough and certain. "I don't want you here just for the thaw. I want you here for the planting, and the mending, and the long winters that follow." She looked at him, steady as the ground beneath their feet. "I didn't ride west to be rescued. I came to build something that lasts." His thumb traced the edge of her wrist. "Then let's build it together." That evening, as dusk settled over the valley, Naomi unpacked her quilt from the satchel she'd carried since Kansas. She spread it over the bed, the worn fabric soft and faded. Owen stood at the doorway, watching her fold the corners tight. "You stitched that by hand?" "Every square." He stepped inside, voice low. Then it belongs here. They lay under it that night, the fire burning low, no words left between them. His arm curled around her waist, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the quiet rhythm of breath and wind. Spring came slow but sure. By April, Naomi had planted onions and early greens behind the cabin. Owen dug the posts for the new room, the scent of fresh cut pine clinging to his clothes. The McClendons stopped by once, bringing fresh eggs and asking after Naomi's uncle. She sent a letter back with them, folded neat and sealed with wax she found in Owen's cupboard. They married in May, under the cottonwoods near the creek. No church, no preacher, just hands clasped and vows spoken plain. The McClendons stood witness. Naomi wore a pale blue dress she'd sewn from calico remnants. Owen wore his cleanest shirt and the boots he'd kept polished since winter. That night, they sat on the porch as stars scattered across the sky, their chairs close, her hand resting on his knee. "I never thought love would find me out here," Naomi said quietly. Owen reached for her hand. "It didn't find you. You built it." They stayed through summer, and then fall, and every season after. The second room filled with shelves and warmth. Naomi's uncle passed the next year, and she inherited his small herd, which they folded into their land. A cow came next. Then chickens. Then a dog that refused to leave. They never left Montana. Because love, for them, wasn't a sudden bloom. It was the slow kind, the kind that grows between fence posts, in quiet kitchens, beneath quilts stitched by hand. The kind built not on rescue, but on choosing, day after day. And they chose each other, for all their days to come.